Hi everyone, Kimmy here, come to tell you a bit more about Dolly. I might have to do it in two halves, it depends. I do have a book in front of me and that's because I've put down little pointers that I want to remember to tell you about Dolly. Right, first of all, you know that Dolly works in a large house. You personally kind of know her now, you know about her. But I also said, I believe in a previous part, that Dolly's mistress, the lady of the house, and a few of her other friends tried to do some humanitarian work. They would go around and help people less fortunate than themselves. Well, at the moment, the lady of the house has been feeling quite unwell. So she has asked Dolly to drop off a hamper of food and goodies, basically things needed, to a family that lives in the village just over the way. Sadly, in the village, there'd been an outbreak of influenza and there'd been some deaths and there'd been some that had been so poorly that they'd lost their jobs and things like that. Well, the lady of the house had taken charge of a young lady called Lily. Well, Lily was in her 30s and she had 5 children and they were all under the age of 7. Sadly, Lily's husband had decided that it would be a good idea to drink himself to the grave, which he had done, leaving the family more often than not without food or any kind of sustenance whatsoever. So poor Lily had to take herself out and get some work. And this is how the lady of the house had met her. She had come and was doing odd jobs around the house when the other servants were too busy to do them, and Lily would get a small amount of money, just enough to keep the family afloat. So the lady of the house asked to speak to Dolly so she could explain to her her reasoning for helping out this family. She said that mainly one of the reasons she wanted to help her was that, she didn't want the children to suffer for the fact that their father, Stanley, had been a drunkard. She didn't want the children to end up having to go to a workhouse. Now, the workhouse isn't good for anyone, and I suppose in some things would say, but the children were given lessons and they were given 3 meals a day and they were clothed and they were this, that and the other until they was roughly 14 or 15. But it wasn't a nice place to be. Often the boys and girls were segregated, they weren't allowed to mix, they didn't see their brothers and sisters. And sometimes the younger brothers and sisters didn't even know they had older brothers and sisters. It wasn't necessarily a nice place. They lived not in squalor, but as close to it as there was without people saying, this isn't fair on them. The children obviously were treated a bit better, but for the adults, if they were in there, it wasn't a good place to be. Yes, you got food and water, but it was like a prison, really. It really was. And you had to work for the little that you did get. The clothing you were given when you arrived wasn't perfect, but you know, a skirt and a top for a woman or a dress, and a poke hat so she could put her hair under it so it wouldn't be seen, so she couldn't be seen as trying to be flirty. Also, on top of that, the children were given clothes. Obviously, many of the clothes they were given were second-hand. The local authorities weren't going to pay out for new, not for a child like this. Some of these children weren't worth keeping, they thought. Not us, nor did Dolly. The people that were in there, keeping in mind that if you stayed in there after you was 14 or 15, this would be your daily chore. You would be woken at 8. There would be 2 lots of prayers during the course of the day, in the morning with your breakfast, and then in the evening before you retired. There were several hours of work during the day. You had 3 meals a day, and then that was taken up by an hour each time, and the rest of the time basically you was working. And generally you retired to bed at 8 o'clock, because remember, you got to be up by 5 in the morning, so it wasn't much of a life, was it? Just turn on. Everyone was given hobnail boots, and the reason for that was because they lasted longer. Not for the reason that they were comfortable, because they often wouldn't, and would rub if they didn't fit properly. They were given food, as I said, but sadly, most of the time, the food was so rare, so small and so badly made that they often was just set off for a slow starvation diet, and that was all there was to it. The men's work, they were given jobs like oakum picking, which is, do you know, the big, big pieces of rope, and they were tarred, sometimes damp and horrible, and it was your job in the whole of the day to sit and unpick these, to unpick the rope. And at the end of the day, if you had a good day, you were expected to have unpicked 3 pounds of rope, which, believe it or not, is quite a lot. I can imagine your fingers are so sore they would bleed. The women, obviously, they did what they had to do. They did domestic service, often cleaning floors 5 or 6 times a day that weren't even dirty. It was just, they were just put to work, made to feel that they were doing something, and they were learnt that you had to work to get the money that you needed. And of course then it would be that when the children were old enough to leave, they hoped and prayed that they could get a job outside. But of course people would come in, and it could be a funeral director or a farmer or something, and he would say, I need to take someone on, I need help. And they often would, young men, girls, were taken out from this place that some of them had known all their lives since they were tiny tots, and they were taken out and just chucked in with people they didn't know. And it was not always guaranteed that they would be treated fairly. They might not even get paid for what they did when they were there. They were the lowest of low. They had come from the workhouse and they had then gone on to work harder somewhere else. So this is why Dolly's mistress had taken on this family. She had even sent in a doctor and had paid for some treatment and some medicines for Lily. She didn't like the idea of the children being taken away from their mother, but she knew that she had to supply what they needed for them to stay there. Otherwise, the authorities would come round and take the children. And the saddest fact, if Lily died, that would be the end of it. They would have no hold. So young Dolly, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, would fill up a basket with odd bits, treats, apples, basic food to get them through, some eggs, some cheese, things that were healthy, she saw as healthy, and would take them to the family. And of course, while she was there, she would sit and talk to Lily. And over the weeks, Lily began to improve, because influenza can be an horrendous thing. Nowadays, of course, there is no need to worry quite so much. You can have injections and pills and potions, but then it wasn't the same, and many people in the Victorian era died of influenza. Hundreds of people, leaving children, mothers, fathers, without the people that they loved. But anyway, that was one more little stint there of what Dolly does in her day. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you again soon. Bye.